Hey everybody, hey all you Stokers, welcome to all the new Stokefire players. In this video, I'm going to talk about some ideas that I've been having and some ideas from some players. So thanks to Flaxlight, I never know how to say your name, Alexander, Drew had a lot of good ideas for this, and I am nobody. So thank you to you guys for your ideas and feedback to this already. And kind of what we're talking about is teams, adding teams into Stokefire. I think this will be a big part of making the game fun and adding social interaction. And that's why Stokefire is built on top of the Farcaster social graph, so that we can, work together. You can have friends and work together and have teams. And so I think this will be a big thing that will hopefully add a lot of fun and strategy to the game. And so I want to share this video with you because I want to get your feedback on what you think of these ideas. Building all this will take time since, we got to build the smart contracts, got to build everything around it. And so I want to kind of make sure I'm building in the right direction and get your guys' ideas and feedback on this. And of course, this idea is hopefully something that we can then build upon and add things to it to make it even more interesting and fun. And this is just kind of like a first version, but even this first version, there's kind of a lot to it. And so kind of the goal here, I have some designs. Well, I guess this isn't really designs. It's almost like some texts showing how this works, and we'll kind of walk through this. But really the goal with this teams is to simulate castles in a kingdom like the ancient world, so it's simple to understand and enjoy playing as a team. So this is one of the main goals / ideas is if you build the game kind of like the real world kind of worked, then it just kind of comes more intuitive to players, I think. And so if this castle, so this is the, kind of getting into the ideas, we're going to have castles, and you're going to, as your villages, you're going to team up with other villages to form a castle. And you'll have a castle that you'll then kind of work together as. And so if we kind of create the game mechanics to be similar to somewhat, like the real world, obviously it's not going to be like the real world completely, but that's going to help it make it simpler for players to kind of understand how it works and kind of join in the fun. So let's kind of get into some of the ideas. I don't have this completely fleshed out, but I have some more of it fleshed out. And so that's where your guys' questions, kind of asking how things work or adding some ideas and feedback will be really helpful. So yeah, definitely do that. Okay, so taxes. In the ancient world, you had to pay taxes to the king. And so that's what we're going to have you do. If you join a castle, you'll automatically pay 10% of your resources, wood and food, to the kingdom, to the castle. And so I think this will be kind of interesting and fun. One of the things I think that is important about this, and with all these ideas, is we don't want to add tons of things that you have to do to kind of run your village. Like, we want the ability for you to be kind of running your village autopilot in a way. And there's a couple ways with this that I want to do that in this team idea, in this castles idea. But this is one of it, is that it automatically happens. You're just automatically paying 10% of your resources to the kingdom. And I have to figure out a little bit what will happen if you don't have resources available. It might even be that you can go negative, and that means that you owe wood or you owe food to the castle, and next time you gather or do something, it's just automatically going to send some of that to the kingdom because you're in debt or whatever. So that might be how I handle that, but that would be a little interesting to figure out how to handle that. So you have to pay taxes. A kingdom can be, or castle, I need to figure out what I should call this. Kingdom, castle, probably the castle. And a castle is made up of villages. A castle can have 5 to 10 villages in it, is what I'm thinking. Reason for that is we don't want to have too big a difference of castles, because then it could make, if you're smaller, maybe there'd be advantages to having a smaller castle. Or vice versa. And I want it to be a small group of a team that's like fun for you to kind of work together. And I think 5 to 10 is kind of the right fit for that. Another question you might be wondering is who can create a castle? And so anyone can just create a castle. You'll start out as the single village in that castle, and then people can join you. And we'll talk about the king, but one of the things the king's role they can do is they are the one that accepts villages into the castle. So you can kind of request to join a castle. That king has to approve you coming into the castle. And so that's kind of how that process works. And if you are the first village to make this castle, you're automatically the king starting out. And we'll get to how the king can kind of change later. And we'll get more into what the king is. You don't have to join a castle. you're paying that 10% tax. The idea and the incentive is that everyone would want to join a castle because there's rewards for doing that. And the incentive will have to make and push the incentive that it's better to be in a castle than not be in a castle. But it is possible to play the game without being in a castle at all. So this 10% tax, that's what allows you to join the kingdom, be in the castle. And then the idea is that the castle will actually generate resources, just like the farm and the lumber camps do. And to make that incentive, I have to just kind of decide how much that should be. But right now I'm thinking it will be double of the amount of taxes that are paid to the castle. That will then double and be like 20% of, 20%, if you double it, will be resources that are generated from the castle. And then that will be able to be split among the villages based on their village size. So you can create a castle with any village. It doesn't have to be in your neighborhood. It can be any village, because the idea is that you can create a castle with your friends, people that you know, so you can have fun strategizing together. But if you're a small village, you're not going to get as many resources out of it as one of the bigger villages, but also because the bigger village is putting more into the castle, and so they kind of get more out of it. So that's kind of how that works. I kind of jumbled a little bit as I explained that, so hopefully that made sense. Basically this idea, bigger villages get bigger share of resources from the castle proportionally. Okay, so castles are kind of generating these resources. And then we have this idea of the king. And the idea of the king is to basically take on more responsibility. They have more power. They get to make some choices. And kind of why I like this as well is that it then allows for a village that's part of a castle to not have to be as active if they don't want to be. They're kind of like giving up the responsibility to the king to make these decisions. And of course, the villages in the castle can kind of like give their suggestions. I kind of imagine there being like a Warpcast direct chat for each castle so that you can kind of strategize in there and stuff. And so villages will be able to tell the king, hey, I think this is what we should do. I think this is what should happen. But the king ultimately gets to make those decisions. So they have some extra power in there. And so there's a couple ways you can become the king. One, you start out the castle. So you first started it. And then two, everyone votes for you to be king. So there'll be a period where you can kind of set a new king for the castle, and you could, vote for some people, and the majority wins, and then that's the new king. I think later what could really make sense is if you hit some stat or something with your village, you automatically can become king. And I think this is kind of cool because if you think about how kingdoms work in the real world, if some person got enough military power to where they can just take over the kingdom and now they're king, I kind of want to have that idea in there where a village can do that. Maybe it's like if they grow really fast, something like that, they can become king. But that would be like a later thing. But the other fun thing that I want to do with this is it kind of adds potentially some competition within the castle itself. Even though you're friends, there's potential for people to want to backstab each other or really want to become the king, which I think would add some fun stuff and drama to it. So what can the king do? So the king chooses 70% of villages that receive resources generated by the castle. And so they can change this every couple of days. We'll see on our timeline. So if you had 10 villages, they're choosing 7 of the 10 to receive the resources. And so, obviously this can create maybe a little bit of drama of the king picking you or not picking you. And kind of what I see happening is the king kind of rotating week to week of like who they're choosing. And maybe the castle villages together are like kind of deciding like who makes sense to pick this week and stuff like that. So that I think will be interesting in itself, that only 70% of villages are getting the resources from it. The other thing the king does is they submit the battle guests. We'll get to what the battles are, but the king ultimately is the one that submits that team's choice, and they can work on that together, but the king submits it. But that's where it's like the king is making these choices. Villages don't necessarily have to participate. The king has to. So if you're a king, like you probably want to be an active player, and that's kind of the idea is that you're taking more of an active role if you're the king. And the king also chooses the enemy castle to fight in battles, which we're about to get to. Okay, so that's what the king does. He has some extra roles, which I think will be fun. Okay, so castle battles. So every 4 days, your castle can raid another castle. The king chooses which castle to raid, and villages in the castle can give input to it. So you're kind of deciding, every 4 days, like, hey, this is the castle we're going to go try to raid. And maybe, there could be multiple reasons why you're choosing that castle. Maybe it's because you think you'll have a better strategy and choice in battle and you're more likely to beat them. Or it could be they have a lot of resources. There will be castles, because of the villages that are in them, that 10% tax will create more resources for that castle over other castles. So there might be some castles that have a target on their back, kind of interestingly, which could be interesting. So yeah, the king chooses what castle to attack, and it's going to be like a first come first serve, where if a king chooses your castle before you are able to choose another castle, then you're automatically combined to have a battle over the next couple of days with that castle. So it's whoever kind of first chooses gets to get the choice of the castle they're fighting. So there's a little bit of a race there potentially between kings. And so how these battles take place, and this is a cool idea that Drew had, is that each castle guesses on the price that the fire token will be. The king submits the guess, and then basically there's a day period of after the guess has been submitted to when at the end of that day, whatever the price is, whichever castle has the closer price guessed to that wins the battle. So this is kind of an interesting thing. One of the things I like about it is that it's something that you can really only do in crypto. So it's a very unique thing to crypto that we can have kind of a guessing game around a price of a token like this, and that it all kind of takes and carries out on chain. The other thing that this does, which is good for the project, I think, is it actually gives some importance to the fire token. And you can imagine there might be some manipulation kind of going on the fire token, which ultimately, people buying and selling, trying to get their price guess to be right, maybe, I think will make for kind of a fun, interesting environment. But I think it's ultimately good for the fire token and good for players because it could hopefully make more volume, which would then go to the players with the fees that we have on the fire token. So I think it would just be a kind of an interesting, fun game. One downside of this, I think, is that it doesn't necessarily feel like it fits into like a battle scenario. It's kind of almost like a mini game of guessing within it. So one idea is that maybe we could kind of brand what the fire token is to something that's global, like weather in the game or something else that could make sense with battles. But under the hood, it's really the price of the fire token that's kind of making that number change and be dynamic in what it is. So there's some playing around with that to maybe do. And then the other thing is obviously there's going to be certain people that are better at this guessing than others. And that's where I think having a king, having someone that's kind of making these decisions ultimately, as well as you can work with other teammates, hopefully make this better. We're not like requiring you to have to be good at guessing what a price could be to be good at the game. Like you can work with others and they can kind of help you in that. Because we still want to make the game fun and good for non-crypto kind of people where they don't necessarily need to understand these things. So that's kind of the idea there that I think could be very interesting and kind of a fun strategy thing where you can imagine castles and teams kind of deciding and chatting about this decision every few days when it happens. And then right now what I'm thinking is that the winner of this battle takes 50% of the other castle's resources that they stole. So that's how you kind of win more, and then each village in the castle is going to get more resources, or I guess 70% of the villages. And then after the battle, villages can then claim their share of the resources that the castle has generated during that time, and take it back to their village to go use it for whatever they need. Okay, so that's kind of the ideas in a nutshell. There's probably still some things I need to kind of figure out to get the details right, but really curious about your guys' feedback on that. The last thing to kind of share is the time frame of this. And I think this will actually kind of help too with just making this whole process be simple, because I don't know, there's some complexity here that you might be, that you're seeing, but in the app itself, we can kind of dumb that down or simplify it by having a castle page where at a certain amount in time, there's only so many things you can do on that page based on the time frame. And so this is kind of how I imagine it is there's like a rotating period, this is a circle of how these battles play out and when you can do something in your castle. So day one, you can vote for a king, pick the new king, and you can leave and join a castle, which will be kind of interesting. Is like you could, if you're not happy with your team, you can leave and go try to find another castle during this day. So you have a day to do that, but it's also a day period where everyone's voting on a king. You can keep if there's no vote that happens, you can keep the current king as your king continuing for the next week or next 4 days. It's a 4-day period, or you can vote for a new king and kind of kick out the last guy. So there's a day for that. Then there's 2 days where the king is picking the castle to attack, to have a battle with. And it's first come, first serve, like I said. So if you get picked first before you have the chance to pick someone else, you're automatically already in a battle with that castle. Also during those 2 days, this is when the king can submit the price guesstimation. And so, the team can kind of work together to decide that. So you have a 2-day period of that. At the end of that, there's just kind of like a freeze period where after a day, all the guesses have to have been submitted. And at the end of this day, that is like the price cutoff where we'll look at the fire price and see, okay, who won, what castle won, who's closer. And then the resources will be kind of switched over to the different castle. The king has to reveal the battle, since it's going to be a secret on chain. And then the villages have an opportunity to claim anything that they, that's in the castle that's their share, they can claim. And then the cycle starts over and you kind of do this again. So that's the cycle. Hopefully that also just makes everything make more sense. And you can imagine in the UI, we'll have like a day of showing this kind of UI for leaving, joining, picking a king. We'll have 2 days for picking the fire price. So if you kind of imagine that way, hopefully it's not, too complicated of what's going on here, even though there's kind of a lot under the hood. So yeah, that is the castles. I think we're calling it castles. That is the castle idea. Curious what you think. There's definitely some details to kind of figure out here before I start building this stuff and making the smart contracts for it. But curious what you think. Does this sound fun? Does it sound exciting? Do you think you'd like this? Do you have any ideas that you think would make it better or holes that you're kind of seeing? That's kind of the stuff I would like you to reply to. And thanks for watching and keep stoking the fire.